Hi, I'm Pranav, and my final project is on the 2014 Home Depot data breach. So, to begin, in 2014, the Home Depot suffered a major data breach. Between April and September of that year, hackers were able to steal over 56 million credit and debit card numbers from its customers, using custom-built malware injected into the company's self-checkout stations in locations across the USA and Canada. As of the date of its occurrence, this was the largest retail card breach on record. So our motivation for studying the attack is threefold. Firstly, Home Depot's response. It's worth studying because I believe Home Depot's response minimized the fallout from the attack and minimized the harm both to themselves and to their customers. We'll explore that a little more deeply in the consequences section. On top of that, this was a huge attack. As I had mentioned in the introduction, this was the largest retail card breach on record when it occurred, and I think just for its sheer scale, it's well worth studying. Finally, this attack shouldn't have happened in the first place. If Home Depot had been proactive, had learned from the mistakes that its competitors had made, it could well have avoided the attack simply by implementing the same precautions that its competitors were forced to implement after they were breached. We'll explore this a little more deeply later on as well. So to begin with some background, in 2014, several large retail companies suffered data breaches wherein millions of customers' card numbers, email addresses, and other pieces of sensitive information were stolen. The first of these was the Target breach occurring in December 2013, and you can see several other significant ones in the infographic on the right. During the Target breach, network credentials were stolen from a small firm that worked with Target, and attackers were able to use them to push malicious software onto point-of-sale devices and steal about 40 million card numbers over the course of 3 weeks. We'll see that this was quite similar to the methodology employed in the Home Depot case. In both the Target and Home Depot cases, attackers use a type of point-of-sale malware, which is malware that specifically targets point-of-sale devices, such as self-checkout machines and cash registers. And it works by scraping the RAM of the machine where it is installed for credit card info after a card has been swiped. Card numbers are a frequent target of cybercriminals because once obtained, they represent an easy and relatively safe method to make money. Hackers will sell the card numbers on darknet markets, and buyers will use them to purchase gift cards, which they can then use to purchase goods to be resold. Tracking these goods is quite difficult because of the method of purchasing, so criminals are often motivated to carry out this sort of attack. It's an easy profit for the hacker and a difficult to trace profit for the person buying the illicit information. So now we'll get into the attack vector. In order to gain access to the Home Depot's network, attackers obtained login credentials from a third-party vendor that worked with the company. They then exploited a zero-day Windows vulnerability in order to escalate their privilege to the Home Depot corporate level. This allowed them to enter the vendor's environment within the network at large. It is likely that they then spent a period of months conducting surveillance on the system and testing out their attack on a smaller scale. From there, the attackers directly installed malware on point-of-sale devices, in this case mostly self-checkout machines, that automatically collected credit card info as transactions occurred and sent it to a collection system somewhere off-site. Although unconfirmed, it is thought that a modified version of the back-off point-of-sale malware was used to execute the attack. This was a specific strain of point-of-sale malware, a Trojan, that was circulating widely during 2013 and 2014 that was used in a number of the prior attacks that we mentioned on the infographic a couple of slides ago, other retail card breaches. So whenever a customer swiped a card, in essence, the malware would comb through the system's RAM, extract the card number, and exfiltrate it to the attacker's off-site system. With their elevated privileges, the attackers were also able to collect customer email addresses, although not passwords or other sensitive personal information. So we now move on to discussing the consequences. Obviously, primary harm was done to the Home Depot itself. As an immediate result of the attack, the Home Depot faced litigation from consumers, banks, and credit unions and its shareholders, stemming from the company's negligence to adequately prepare for and protect itself from the attack. It also faced significant financial losses, and it is likely that many customers lost trust in the company to safeguard their data effectively. However, their financial losses were not as large as they could have been, as we'll see in just a moment. Secondary harm was done to the customers whose information was stolen. Their cards may be used to make fraudulent transactions, their email addresses may be used for phishing scams, and their identities may be stolen for illicit ends. Now, onto the company's response. For its part, Home Depot acted quickly to minimize the fallout from the attack. Upon disclosing the attack, the company immediately took all compromised point-of-sale units out of service and implemented a number of improved security protocols. End-to-end encryption from the point of sale to the bank was implemented for all payments made in-store, and chip and PIN card reading technology was prioritized. It was already being rolled out, but that rollout was vastly accelerated once the data breach had occurred. This was impactful as the magnetic stripe card readers in wide use before were much more susceptible to fraud than the more sophisticated chip and PIN systems that they were phasing in. In addition, the company provided free credit monitoring services for all customers who may have been impacted by the breach. Now, the Home Depot company suffered pre-tax data breach-related expenses of about $198 million as of 2020. This is not an insignificant chunk of money, even for a company as large as the Home Depot, but it falls considerably short of the $10 billion that was expected to be lost by Forbes. This was an estimate made in 2014. Unlike Target, the Home Depot's stock price did not tumble significantly in the wake of the breach, which may be attributed to their more transparent and active approach in dealing with the crisis. In 2020, the company finally reached a $17.5 million settlement, which is not included in the $198 million figure you see there, to resolve a probe into the breach, requiring it to hire a chief information security officer and improve its security procedures and training. This was the result of a multi-state piece of litigation. 46 states came together, as well as the District of Columbia, to look into possible negligence by Home Depot in the case of this data breach. So moving on to drawing some conclusions. The first conclusion I'd like to draw is that this was a very preventable event. If the attack vector employed by the attackers in the Home Depot case was entirely novel, it may have been fair to absolve Home Depot of some guilt. But, given the number of large-scale retail data breaches, some of which we outlined on the infographic a few slides ago, given the number of large-scale retail data breaches employing RAM-scraping malware that occurred prior to the Home Depot breach, the company had a responsibility to update their security policies to ensure that they were protected. They could have put in place the very same measures that other companies were scrambling to implement after their own breaches, such as Target. And their failure to do so means the responsibility for the breach has to be on them. However, we can observe that the company's quick, transparent, and impactful response helped to minimize their harm in contrast to the Target event. Being proactive in preventing data breaches is always the best solution, but if a breach does occur, we can see that acting quickly and being upfront about the process is the best way to reduce harm, and Home Depot was able to do so. So I do have a couple of questions related to this presentation. Firstly, how might the shift towards mobile payments, such as Apple Pay, change how we secure transactions and card information? And secondly, how should companies be proactive in their attempts to prevent retail card breaches? All right, and that marks the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening. Here is a list of the works cited that I used.